I'm Kiera Morgan. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Coffee with Kiera. We're sponsored by The Human Bean in Newport and Lincoln City. And today I'm excited to be joined by Lincoln County District Attorney Jenna Wallace. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So glad that you could join us. We've been wanting to do this for close to a year now, ever since you got on, but you've been a smidge busy.
A little bit.
So first, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do as District Attorney for Lincoln County.
Okay. So I've been the district attorney for about 8 to 9 months now. Originally, I was appointed back at the end of June of last year when Lainey Danforth resigned early, and then took my official term, started in January of this year. I'm coming on 10 years of being a prosecutor. I started in Coos County, and then I went to Lane County, and then ultimately ended up here in Lincoln County. I really fell in love with prosecution while I was in law school. I got to clerk in the Washington County DA's office, and really just loved reading police reports and thinking about what you could charge a person and how you resolve. And I know that sounds so nerdy, but I guess I'm probably a legal nerd at some deep part of my heart. But no, and then I think I really just fell in love with meeting with victims, right? And seeing how the criminal process really affects them and being kind of their voice in some really traumatic times or, times where there's a lot of uncertainty about what's happened to them and what the criminal justice system can do for them. And so, I don't know, it's been an incredible career so far. I've really loved what I do. Anytime I get to talk about it, I get so excited to tell people and share with people what I do on a daily basis, and why it's so important to our community and public safety. Right now, obviously, I am the district attorney, but I also have a caseload. Not every district attorney carries a caseload, especially in the larger counties where they have more DDAs. But I think that's one of the, honestly, benefits of being in a small county is that I not only get to be the elected DA, but I also get to carry a caseload and interact with victims and charge cases and go to trial. I love trial. That's why I became a prosecutor. So right now, I not only have kind of the management side of being the DA, but I also have a small caseload, mostly child and adult sex offenses is really where my heart and passion is. And that's really where my caseload primarily exists. And so that's really what I've been doing is keeping up with cases here in Lincoln County while also figuring out the managing side of being the district attorney.
So speaking of the management side, tell us a little bit about your office. You've had some small growth since we talked last.
Yes. So when I took over in July of 2024, it was essentially me and one other deputy district attorney who was doing criminal prosecution. Normally it's me plus 9. So that we were at a pretty big deficit at that point. It felt a little bit like how are we going to do this? How are we going to keep up with cases? And that's really where my heart is at, is making sure that we are prosecuting crime and that victims are getting represented in court and things like that. And so that was really one of probably the most daunting tasks, was how do I get bodies into the office who can help with this caseload? Thankfully, the Department of Justice actually lent us one of their prosecutors for 3 months. And so he really helped kind of pick up the slack as much as we could with 3 people. And then I think that we just started getting applicants and we started hiring people. And now we are up to me plus 6 doing criminal prosecution, which is pretty awesome. A very drastic change than where we were last July. And I always tell the one DDA that kind of stuck with me, I always tell him that I'm so thankful that he didn't, jump ship. When most people probably would have jumped shipped, but we made it through and we're doing well. And so, I think that it looks a little bit different in here than it did back in June or July of last year. And it's starting to feel normal, right? Starting to feel like they're getting their, sea legs on. They know what they're doing. They're handling their cases. I've heard really good feedback from the judges about how some of the really brand new attorneys are doing in court. And so it's starting to feel like an actual office now, which is great.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that you mentioned victims, and that's your passion. But you also work with specialty courts to try to help those who may be offenders to get better. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think that crime comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. We have obviously the most heinous of crimes, which is, homicide or murder. And then we have some really low level crimes, which is, the petty theft and the disorderly conduct. And then you have property crimes that are kind of weirdly in between there. And I think that working in a couple different counties has given me a really good perspective on not only how different counties operate, but also our incredibly robust treatment courts here in Lincoln County. They are really unmatched to what I've seen in some of the other counties that I've worked in. And I think what is so successful here is that the judges who preside over them truly care so much about not only our community and community safety, but also the fact that there are people that are worth saving, right? That there are people who, when you take the drugs away, when you work on the mental health issues, that they can be in our community and they can be really successful in our community. And I think that's really, you're right, a different piece of what my job is really evaluating cases and determining whether or not this is someone who is committing crimes because of the drug use, or whether or not they're just someone who commits crime regardless of the drug use. And I think our treatment courts are really aimed at addressing individuals where, when you address their actual needs in the community, whether that be drug and alcohol treatment, mental health treatment, domestic violence treatment, things like that, that all of a sudden their lives change and it changes the community for the better. And so it's been incredibly rewarding to see our treatment courts, to see people who other individuals may not have taken a chance on them, and yet they make it through, drug court, hope court, and they're successful and they lead very different lives. And most of the time we don't see them back in our criminal justice system. And that's really the hope and dream for anyone, right? We really hope that you come through the system once and you never come back. And I think treatment courts is an incredible example of adding some extra supports in for people, and then really flourishing through that extra supervision. And ultimately, we never see them again, which is ultimately the goal, and not in a rude way. It's just ultimately the goal,
And let's talk a little bit about the newest program that helps people with the drugs, if they get a citation, they can go through a special program. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So Deflection has been up since December 31st of last year. So we're about 3 months into it. And honestly, I think that it was slow to start, but I think it's really starting to hit its stride right now. And the whole idea behind Deflection is that there are individuals in our community who, kind of like what I said, when you take away the drug aspect of things, they're not out there committing crimes. And that was something that the state really wanted us to focus on, is really focus on the individuals where you remove the drugs and they're just a normal, productive member of society.
Which was part of what the goal was in decriminalizing it, but that kind of backfired.
Yes, exactly. And so really the idea is that when law enforcement contacts these individuals and they have, a residual or a very small amount of controlled substances on them, that instead of just automatically putting them in handcuffs, taking them to jail, the DA's office filing, that there's this phone number that they can call, and that's the Deflection phone number. We have 3 community partners who are participating in that. We have the Siletz Tribe, Phoenix Wellness, and Reconnections. They do a rotation of that phone, so they're on for about a month at a time, and then a different community partner takes over. And they're really a 24/7 call when you contact type person, and really a problem solver, right? So the idea is that the officer calls them, lets them know, hey, I think this person would be good for Deflection. They then talk to the person. They come up with kind of a game plan. We have housing associated with it. Helping Hands up in Lincoln City is actually one of our partners in it as well. And so it's really kind of, again, looking at that idea of, does this person need to be at the jail and to be criminally charged and get a defense attorney and, be convicted? Or is this someone who really just needs some extra support from our community partners, in the treatment realm, to get them back on their feet or to get them, the resources that they need? We also kind of learned early on in that process that sometimes people might not be in the right state of mind when police contact them, to be able to kind of understand the benefits of deflection and why they might want to get connected with a treatment provider versus going to jail. And so my program coordinator, Shannon, actually kind of came to me and was like, would it be okay if I looked at the jail roster and maybe saw if there may be individuals on there that would qualify for deflection? I thought that's a great idea. And so she's built some really great relationships with our pretrial services through the sheriff's office, obviously our community partners with treatment. And so she actually goes through the roster every morning and she looks to see if anyone has, the right charges for deflection. And she's actually deflected people from the jail before we charge them. And so it's just been incredible to see, we all have the same goal in mind, but it's been really cool to see how the program has kind of morphed into reaching the most amount of people with the resources that we have. So it's going really well. We've had some really good success stories in it so far, and I hope that just continues to grow as people become more used to this idea of deflection.
I think that's fantastic, and Shannon's amazing.
Yes.
So there are some who may look at all these new people and these new programs and things, and may think that it's difficult to handle, and that do not enough experience and things like that. How do you combat that?
As far as deflection, or just kind of more in a
just
general
in
sense?
general with the DA's office?
I think that, everyone has to start somewhere, right? Not, especially in a smaller county. This idea that we would somehow get, 9 attorneys who have 10 plus years of experience, to come to Lincoln County. I mean, it's not the world we live in right now. Every DA's office probably has an opening, probably has multiple openings. And I think Lincoln County, we recognize that we're never going to pay, what downtown Portland pays. And not everyone wants to live in Lincoln County. And so I think that really what I've tried to focus on is finding individuals who want to be here, right? That's kind of number one, is that you want to live in Lincoln County, but also you want to learn. Because I love talking to people about my job. I love training about my job. I sometimes look back and I think, I can't believe I've been a prosecutor for 10 years at this point. And I surprise myself sometimes with the information that I have in my brain, if that makes sense at all. But no, I think that really what I've tried to focus on is imparting my knowledge on kind of that next generation of DDAs, of people working in the office. But also hiring people who want to learn and who want to better themselves and better the community. And I think Shannon is an incredible example of that. She kind of came in and we hadn't had a deflection program before. We didn't have a coordinator position before. It was a brand new thing. And she really came in ready to work, ready to make those connections and ready to figure out, how do we make this work without a lot of direction from me? And those are the types of people that ultimately end up being successful and making a program successful in itself. And that's really, I think, what I've tried to figure out is, how do you find those people who are going to be self-motivated to make whatever they're working on better and better and better, and learn through that process.
So what are some other challenges that you're facing?
I think, to be honest, you obviously know I made a pretty public statement about 2 weeks ago at the Board of Commissioners meeting. The biggest challenge that I have faced has been dealing with the Lincoln County administration. People have asked me, they obviously know that I was short-staffed for, 3 to 4 months, and that was an incredibly trying time. And so, I get checked in on a lot, how are things going? And my kind of go-to answer over the past couple months has been, internally, things are great. The offices are filled. DDAs are going to court. They have caseloads. The staff here is incredible. Internally, our office is functioning great. It's the external stuff. It's, not getting answers from the county or having people sign on my behalf documents.
Now, can you mentioned that? Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah. So I've had a couple different instances where has signed personnel action forms on my behalf. So there's there's a spot for the elected official or the department head, and he signs his name for me as the department head, and then he signs for himself as well. And it's really about moving people into different positions. They've laid off people without notice to me. They've bumped people without notice to me or anyone in my office. And when I ask for clarification, they won't give me anything. And that has been really, really hard for me to understand why people outside of my office are making decisions for my office when they won't explain the reason why. And honestly, that has been the most difficult part of this job, is dealing with the administration of Lincoln County.
So Lincoln County has said that they've worked with prior DAs and they haven't had an issue. Why is this suddenly a clash between the DA's office and the county?
I knew coming into this that it was going to be difficult to rebuild those bridges. I think that it's not a secret that there was a tumultuous relationship between DA Danforth and the county prior to me taking over. And I think that I was really worried that I'm similarly aged to Lainey, and I'm a female and I'm coming in, kind of on her coattails essentially. And I was really worried that I would get labeled as Lainey 2.0, right? And that I wouldn't get a fair shake, for me being me and me being an individual. And one of the first things I did when I was elected and I knew I was going to be taking over is I asked to meet with each commissioner. And I sat down with them and I really tried to clear the air, right? And tried to explain, like, listen, I know there's been this past. I don't want to continue that. We don't do anything beneficial for our community when we feud. That's the last thing I want to be doing. And I love prosecuting. So the less I have to deal with the politics of it all, the more I get to spend in the things that I actually love to do. And I got I got kind of a mixed response. I got a lot of, smiles and head nods and yes, absolutely. We want to give you a fair shake. But I also got a little bit of the, well, you kind of got to pay for the sins of your predecessor and then we'll see how it goes. Like almost like you've got to prove to us that you're not her. And that's hard to do because when I'm being faced with decisions, right, that are happening outside of my control, that should be within my control, I really felt like I was faced with two options. I either sit down, shut my mouth, and allow what I believe to be unethical behavior or corrupt behavior to continue, to hope, right, that they don't view me as someone like Lainey or view me as someone like someone else, or I speak up and I voice my concern and I voice my opinion, and I essentially hope and pray that they don't just write me off. And it was a really hard decision. It would have been a lot easier, right, for me to just sit in my office and close my door and just allow it to continue to happen and not say anything. And but I don't think that that's what the people of Lincoln County, voted for me to do. I think that as an elected official, right, we're entrusted with a lot of authority. And I don't think, in this position for me to sit by and quietly watch, other individuals do unethical things or corrupt things. I don't know if I would be doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I knew that would come with a lot of negativity. I knew that I probably would be attacked and not physically, but, attacked in the public. And, there's always comments on Facebook, and I try to stay off there as much as possible because I don't think any good comes from social media fights. But yeah, I don't regret what I did. I do believe that I'm trying to be transparent and trying to cast transparency on the county. And they don't want that. They don't want the public to know what's going on behind the scenes. But I think that that's what our role as elected officials is to do, is to speak out when we think that something is wrong, when we think that there's injustice going on. And that's what I'm going to continue to do until the people of Lincoln County don't want me to be here anymore.
So do you think that it's possible that was just doing his job, maybe trying to push things through more efficiently by, putting his name on your spot. Maybe that's something that has always been done before, so it's continued. What do you think that's their thought process, that this is just something that we've always done, so it's not a big deal?
Yes and no. I think that early on, right, when I first started seeing what I would call to be yellow flags, right, I think that I could have chalked it up to that. What was weird is that they would have me sign some of them, but not all of them. So it would logically, I'm a very logical person, right? If the policy was or just signed all of those, right, and to save me time, then I think I could say, okay, that logically makes sense. You don't need my signature. You're signing all of them. But to only sign them on specific ones that weren't, there was no communication on. I mean, they laid off an employee and never once told me. So she got the email and was crying out there asking me why I didn't tell her, and I had no idea. And so it's you see a yellow flag and you think, okay, maybe it's a coincidence, and you see the second one and you think, okay, maybe this is just a miscommunication thing. But then as the flags begin to turn red and you speak out against it and it gets worse and worse and worse, there's a point of no return where it's not just them doing what they think is right. It's then at that point them just doing what they want to do and not caring about the ramifications to my office.
But the county is in charge of hiring and firing, even in your office. Is that right? Even though you're an elected official, they have control of your office as far as who gets hired and who gets fired.
It's an interesting question, yeah, because I'm in a weird spot, because not only I'm obviously the elected district attorney, right, and I'm the department head of the district attorney's office, but I'm not paid for by the county. So I'm actually a state employee, and I get paid for my primary salary comes from the state, and that's normal for every district attorney in Oregon. I do get paid a small stipend from the county, and so I get tax paperwork from the county every year because they do pay me a small stipend. But there is that weird kind of oddity, because what I've been told by the county is that doesn't believe that I have any authority over my office because I'm a state employee and not a county employee. But then that makes me think, then what really is my role here, right? I'm not quite sure if I don't have any authority over my employees, over my office policies, over what happens in my office, then why does the sheriff? And why does the treasurer? And why does the county clerk? Right? Why am I different than Adam Shanks, who is the sheriff of, Lincoln County right now? Does he have the authority to hire and fire because his full salary is paid for by the county? And if that's true, then why am I different? Why would the fact that my funding comes from a different location, why would that limit the amount of power that I have over my office? It's an interesting question. And I don't necessarily know if I know, the exact answer on that. But my biggest thing is that why would I be treated different than any other elected official in Lincoln County? Because I know, Sheriff Shanks has the authority to hire and fire, and that's the very clear in case law that he has the authority to hire and fire. Why would I be different as the district attorney of Lincoln County?
Interesting. And you have a good relationship and collaboration with other law enforcement and things like that in Lincoln County. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I've obviously been here 3 years, and it's always so difficult to start in a new county because you really get to know your law enforcement partners, especially in a small county. And I am so lucky with the agencies that we have here in Lincoln County. They really embraced me, honestly, when I first came here as a DDA. And then when I obviously became the elected district attorney, they have been so supportive. I think I can't think of one person I don't have a good relationship with in law enforcement. Routinely, they stop by my office, whether it's patrol or detective or lieutenants, and we chit chat about cases, and, they call me and ask for my opinion. And so I've been incredibly lucky to have such great community support in the law enforcement realm. I've also built really great relationships with other community partners. So I've had very close relationships with Phoenix Wellness, with Reconnections, the Siletz Tribe. I think through obviously the Deflection program, I became much closer to those individuals as well. And I think the community support for not only me, but also what my office does has been overwhelming. And I'm so thankful for that, because there are some counties where they don't have that, or they don't have those relationships, depending on the situation. And this would be a much, much more lonely road, right? If I was just kind of out here on an island. But I really feel so supported by my other law enforcement agencies in this county, especially, the sheriff's office, who is part of this, actual county administration. But we have some incredible officers in this county that do such an incredible job, and that ultimately makes my job and prosecutions a lot easier when they do such an incredible investigation on the front end.
What do you feel can be done to fix the situation with the county?
Mm-hmm. You know what? That's a great question. I have an idea of what I think would fix it, right? But I don't know if that's necessarily because of what I've experienced, or what what logically should happen. What I have asked on 3 separate occasions of the Board of Commissioners at this point is, I've raised concerns about 2 individuals in the county. I've given examples and exhibits of what they have done. I've been concerned about how they treated me, how they treated other individuals in my office, and then obviously some of the things that they've purported and said that I believe is dishonest. And what I have asked for in those 3 separate times is just for them to open an investigation. I'm not looking for immediate discipline or something crazy along those lines. I'm asking for those individuals to be treated like the other individuals in our county that have had allegations against them. And we've seen in the public, right, when Casey spoke publicly at that September meeting, he was immediately placed on administrative leave. They immediately hired an outside investigator, and they did, a whole series, I think it was 4 months of an investigation. And where I've been frustrated is why, when I bring similar concerns, right, about other individuals in the county, why aren't those being heard? And why aren't they treating those similarly to the exact same way they treated Casey Miller in that situation? I think that at the bottom line, right, is that we all want equality, and if there was an investigation and they said, there just wasn't enough evidence, similar to, what they said about Casey, there just wasn't enough evidence that he was, harassing or bullying or whatever, then I would accept that, right? Because that's ultimately how I do my job, right? Someone investigates, there's findings, logically I can get there. What I've been really concerned about is, why won't they investigate it? And I think the biggest concern is the 2 people that I've brought forward concerns about are the people who are deciding whether or not it gets investigated. And when that is when those are the decision makers, right, there's a lot of room for, corruption, right? I obviously wouldn't want to investigate myself, right? If someone was saying that I was doing something wrong, my human nature would probably be like, I don't want to invest. I don't want someone to be looking into me. But that's what our county deserves, right? And that's what I would expect. If someone had concerns about me, then absolutely, you should open an investigation, because at the end of the day, we should all be held accountable for our actions, me included. And that's all I'm asking. I'm just asking for them to do exactly what they did in Casey Miller's situation: open an investigation, look into my concerns, and if I'm crazy, I'm crazy. But I think that is what justice requires, is that we not only listen when people bring up concerns, but we investigate them to the full extent, and we decide whether or not something actually happened or not.
What else do you want to add about your office and the work that you're doing?
Oh, man. I think, like I said, I think things feel good right now. Very busy, very, very busy, but good. And what I really, through all of this, one of the things that has always been kind of in the back of my mind is that I never want the political piece of this job to interfere with the prosecution piece of this job, because the prosecution piece of this job is just too important. It's too important to our community. It's too important to public safety. It's too important to, victims. And so when I chose to speak out 2 weeks ago, I really had done everything I could internally, behind the scenes, through emails, to kind of raise awareness or to raise my concerns. And I had really, really hoped that, on the 10th or 11th email of saying, this is concerning behavior, that someone would have listened, that someone would have said, hey, you know what, let's look into that. But that's not the culture that's here in Lincoln County. And I know Casey Miller has asked repeatedly to talk about my concerns, and he's not allowed to talk about them with the other Board of Commissioners. And so I really felt like I kind of had hit that point of not knowing where to go next. And I think that as an elected official, right, the next place you go is the media, right? You talk about it openly and publicly. But I never want that piece of it to impact the prosecution part. And that really was what I wanted to get across, is that I'm so tired of fighting with the county, and I don't want to do it anymore. I want to focus on prosecuting, and that's what I'm going to do. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to roll over. It doesn't mean that I'm going to stop fighting for justice and fighting for what's right. But I also can't let that consume my life, my personal life, my professional life, and my caseload, because the only people that it's hurting is the people of Lincoln County. And when you step back and I look at why I'm in this job, why I ran for district attorney, why I care so deeply about this position, it's because of the actual work, right? It's because of the people that I get to come into contact with and the trials I get to go to, and the people I get to recommend for treatment court. I mean, that's the piece of the job that matters the most. And that's what I want to get back to. And I hope that by coming out 2 weeks ago and raising my concerns publicly, I hope that the Board of Commissioners will do what's in the best interest of this county, and do the right thing. But in the meantime, my passion, my direction, and my time and energy has to get back to prosecution, because I'm not willing to sacrifice that aspect of the job to continue to fight for justice in the administration piece of it if other people don't care. And that's sad. It's like, saying that out loud is really sad to me, because everyone should care about seeking the truth and making sure that everyone's protected under the law and under personnel rules. But I also recognize that I don't have the power to force the Board of Commissioners to care, the entire Board of Commissioners to care. But I do have the power to focus on my caseload, and to focus on training DDAs, and to focus on the internal piece of my office that positively impacts our community. And that's ultimately where I end up, right? Is that that's more important than all of the noise that the county's making.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you
for sharing with us today on Coffee with Kiera.
Yeah.
Again, we are sponsored by The Human Bean, Newport, located at 6th Street and Highway 101 in Lincoln City, at the north end of the highway on the west side, next to TLC Credit Union. I'm Kiera Morgan. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Coffee with Kiera.